In the spring of 2025, a woman published a memoir detailing a childhood that sounds like an absolute nightmare. She grew up in a house reeking of stale smoke, stepping around animal waste, opening a refrigerator full of expired food, and surviving the violent emotional storms of a severely mentally ill mother. Her childhood was so broken, she possesses exactly one photograph of her parents together. But here's the detail that stopped the world dead in its tracks. The absentee father in this horrifying story was not a deadbeat stranger. It was Tom Hanks, the man universally worshipped as America's dad, the ultimate Hollywood symbol of decency, warmth, and moral perfection. How does the most trusted, comforting father figure in American history allow his own daughter to grow up in a literal war zone? What dark generational secrets was Tom Hanks hiding behind that billion-dollar smile? And why, when the devastating book was finally released, did he simply nod and confess that he was not surprised by her trauma? Think about that for a second. Have you ever realized that the families who look the most perfect on the outside are often carrying the heaviest, darkest secrets on the inside? Leave a comment below, because the truth hidden behind closed doors is the real heartbeat of this story. To understand the aging Hollywood icon, reading his daughter's memoir today, we have to rewind the tape. Long before he was America's dad, he was just a neglected, invisible little boy, sitting entirely alone on a Greyhound bus. That bus was not taking him on a family vacation. It was traveling along the long, empty stretches of California highway that connected one fractured household to another. For Tom Hanks, the 1960s did not look like a nostalgic television sitcom. It looked like the dirty, tinted window of a Greyhound bus. When his parents divorced, he was just 5 years old. In an era when divorce was still spoken about in hushed, scandalous whispers, the Hanks children were essentially treated like displaced luggage, shuffled back and forth across the sprawling, indifferent geography of California. By the time Tom was 7 or 8 years old, he was already a seasoned, solitary traveler. Picture a young, incredibly skinny boy sitting alone in the heavy, vinyl seats of a commercial bus. The journey from his mother's small town to his father's house in Oakland took 5 grueling hours. 5 hours of absolute, unchaperoned silence. He would press his cheek against the cold glass of the window, feeling the heavy, relentless vibration of the massive diesel engine rattling right through his skull. He would stare out at the blurring landscape, the massive 18-wheeler trucks blowing past on the highway, the long, heavy freight trains cutting through the agricultural valleys, the wind of early spring aggressively whipping across the empty wheat fields. No one was sitting next to him, reading him a book. No one was asking him how his day was. He was just a kid, staring out at a lonely road, learning very early on that the world is a massive, moving machine, and you are entirely on your own to figure out how to survive the ride. And when the air brakes finally hissed and the bus pulled into Oakland, the destination did not offer a warm, comforting sanctuary. He lived with his siblings and his father in a cramped, run-down apartment. And a defining characteristic of this apartment was not abuse, but something that is often just as damaging to a child's psychology. It was absolute structural neglect. His father was working. He was busy trying to survive. And the children were simply left to manage themselves. Decades later, Tom would look back on those years and describe himself with a brutal, unflinching honesty. He said he was a kid who had simply fallen through the cracks. Nobody really took care of me like a grown-up, he confessed. Think about the daily, physical reality of a household with no real adult supervision. There were no set bedtimes. There were no enforced rules. Tom remembered waking up in the early hours of the morning or wandering into the kitchen late at night, pulling open the heavy door of the refrigerator. The cold, yellow light would spill onto his face in the dark apartment. He would reach in, grab a bottle of milk, and drink the entire thing directly from the glass. He could drink all the milk in the fridge, and absolutely no one would come into the room to stop him. When you are a child, that kind of freedom feels like a chaotic superpower. But when you become an adult, you realize that unlimited freedom for a 7-year-old is just another word for abandonment. But nothing captures the visceral, neglected reality of that Oakland apartment quite like the kitchen stove. It was a heavy cast iron range. And because they were just kids trying to figure out how to feed themselves, they relied heavily on the cheapest, easiest food available: canned tomato soup. They would open the tin, pour the thick red paste into a cheap metal pot, turn up the heat, and simply walk away. Without an adult to watch the boiling liquid, the inevitable happened constantly. The red soup would rapidly bubble up, violently spill over the rim of the pot, and instantly burn onto the scorching cast iron grates. Nobody cleaned it up. The burnt food just sat there, baking into the metal day after day, week after week. Tom later joked, with that dark, deflective humor that only trauma survivors truly master, that scraping the burnt tomato soup off that stove was literally like doing an archaeological dig. You had to chip away through thick, blackened, fossilized layers of old dinners just to see the metal underneath. The sensory reality of that kitchen was suffocating. The apartment was constantly filled with a sharp, acrid, sour stench of burning tomatoes. A heavy, sweet, but completely sickening cloud of caramelized steam would rush into the air every time the stove was turned on. The smell seeped into the walls. It seeped into their clothes. There were absolutely no smoke detectors in that old building. Tom pointed out that if they had actually installed one, the alarm would have been screaming every 3 days. That is not a quirky childhood anecdote. That is the environment of a child who is completely fending for himself. Now, I want you to hold on to that exact image. A child standing in a kitchen that smells like stale smoke and rotting food, opening a refrigerator, realizing that there is no adult coming to save the day. Because decades later, in the year 2025, his own daughter, Ye, Hanks, would publish a memoir. And in that book, she would describe her own childhood in Sacramento. She would write about stepping around animal waste in the backyard. She would write about a house that stank of old cigarette smoke. She would write about opening a refrigerator that was completely packed with expired, rotting food. When Tom Hanks read those pages, the world was shocked by the horrific conditions his daughter had endured. But Tom wasn't shocked. He publicly stated he was not surprised. How could he be surprised? When he read his daughter's words, he wasn't just reading about her trauma. He was smelling the burnt tomato soup all over again. He was feeling the rumble of the Greyhound bus. He knew exactly what it felt like to open a refrigerator in a dark, neglected house and realize you are completely on your own. The tragedy wasn't that he didn't care. The tragedy was that the exact same cycle of neglect had somehow slipped past his defenses and repeated itself in the next generation. But back in the late 1960s, the boy in the dirty Oakland apartment didn't have the luxury of analyzing generational trauma. He just needed to figure out how to escape it. If nobody in the real world was going to look at him, if nobody was going to take care of him, he was going to have to find a way to force the world to pay attention. He was going to have to become someone else entirely. He was a ghost of a kid, a hyper-skinny, deeply insecure teenager who barely weighed 96 pounds. What does 96 pounds actually look like on a teenage boy in an American high school? It looks like clothes hanging off a wire hanger. It means your collarbones jut out against your shirt. It means you are physically too weak to play sports, too fragile to command any respect in the hallways, and entirely incapable of defending yourself. In a brutal high school ecosystem, being that small doesn't just make you a target. It makes you practically invisible. When you spend your entire childhood falling through cracks at home, surviving on burnt tomato soup, and you are completely invisible in the real world, you desperately need to find a survival mechanism. You need a place where people are absolutely forced to look at you. For Tom, That survival mechanism was a theater stage. He didn't start acting because he had some grand, pretentious artistic vision. He started acting out of pure psychological necessity. Think about the physical reality of a theatrical stage. The heavy smell of dusty canvas curtains. The blinding, intense heat of the overhead spotlights hitting your face in the dark. When you stand in the absolute center of that light and you memorize the right lines, you can finally control the room. You can be loud. You can be funny. For a couple of hours a night, you are not the neglected kid from the dirty Oakland apartment. You are whoever the script says you are. The laughter of the audience in the dark is an incredibly potent narcotic. Acting became his ultimate escape hatch. And it drove him straight to Sacramento State University in the mid-1970s. It was there in the dusty, chaotic backstage wings of the college theater department that he met Susan Dillingham. She was a fellow acting student, a vibrant, ambitious young woman who went by the stage name Samantha Lewis. They were both young. They were both incredibly broke, and they were both aggressively chasing the exact same impossible Hollywood dream. They fell in love, and they rushed headfirst into marriage. Now, if you look at this through the clinical lens of psychology, the blinding speed of their commitment makes perfect, heartbreaking sense. When a boy grows up without a stable home, without rules, without a family dinner table, or a mother checking his homework, his deepest, most primal psychological craving is to build the exact thing he never had. He wants to buy the house. He wants to have the kids. He desperately wants to play the role of the reliable, loving father. He wants to rewrite his own history. By the time Tom was in his early 20s, he and Susan already had 2 young children, Colin and Ye. He was hustling with the frantic, terrified energy of a man trying to outrun poverty. He was driving his beat-up car across the smog-choked valleys of Los Angeles, trying to break into the television industry. He was sweating in cramped casting rooms, fighting for sitcom roles, and trying to pull his young family out of the financial grind. He was trying to be the ultimate provider. But here's the thing about building a life. A house built on top of unresolved childhood trauma is structurally doomed from the very start. The marriage began to violently fracture. The suffocating pressure of 2 young actors trying to survive the ruthless economics of Los Angeles was already heavy. But that pressure was combined with the dark, unpredictable emotional storms that were beginning to brew inside Susan. She was battling severe, undiagnosed mental health issues. The extreme paranoia and the devastating, uncontrollable mood swings were starting to tear the fabric of their daily life to shreds. This is where the brutal reality contrast of Tom Hanks's life first begins to take shape. In the early 1980s, his career started to gain real traction. He landed a starring role in the sitcom Bosom Buddies. He was going to work every single day, putting on funny costumes, delivering brilliant comedic timing, and making millions of Americans laugh in their living rooms. But when the director yelled cut, he had to drive his car back to an apartment that felt like a high-pressure ticking bomb. He was coming home to screaming arguments, deep paranoia, and a partner who was slowly, tragically slipping out of reality. Tom tried to hold it together. He tried to be the anchor. But he was fighting a war he was completely unequipped to win. He was a guy who didn't even know what a healthy marriage looked like, trying to single-handedly manage a severe psychiatric crisis. By 1985, after 5 years of an exhausting, chaotic, deeply painful marriage, the dam finally broke. They filed for divorce. To the outside world, this was just another standard, predictable Hollywood split. Tom Hanks was just starting to become genuinely famous. He had recently starred in the massive hit movie Splash. His public star was rising rapidly on the global stage, and a divorce seemed like a routine celebrity casualty. A custody agreement was hammered out in the courts. Susan was granted primary custody, and Tom was given the standard weekend and summer visitation rights. When the ink dried on those legal papers, he probably took a deep breath. He probably thought the worst of the chaos was finally over. He probably believed that by establishing a strict legal routine, he could finally impose some order on the mess, protect his kids, and focus on building his empire. But he was horribly, tragically wrong. The divorce was not the end of the nightmare. It was merely the unlocking of the door. Fast forward just a few months. The ink on the custody agreement is barely dry. Tom Hanks is driving his car through the sunny, palm tree-lined streets of Los Angeles. It is a warm Friday afternoon. He is in a good mood. He pulls up to his children's elementary school to pick up Colin and Ye for his designated, legally mandated weekend visit. He puts the car in park. He kills the engine. He walks up to the heavy chain-link gates of the school, and he waits. The shrill, metallic sound of the school bell rings out. The heavy double doors swing open, and hundreds of kids pour out of the classrooms. The schoolyard is a chaotic blur of backpacks, shouting children, and yellow school buses pulling away from the curb. Tom stands at the gate, watching the crowd. He waits for his son and his daughter to run up to him. But Colin and Ye do not walk through the doors. The crowd of children slowly thins out. The buses drive away. The playground goes incredibly, eerily quiet. He walks into the building. He asks the teachers. He checks the front office. And then, standing in that sterile school hallway, the cold, suffocating panic hits him like a physical punch to the chest. The school secretary looks at him and delivers the news. His children are not at school today. In fact, they haven't been at school for 2 entire weeks. In the 1980s, there were no cell phones. There was no GPS tracking. When someone disappeared, they were simply gone. His ex-wife had quietly packed up his son and his daughter, vanished from Los Angeles without a single word of warning, and driven them hours away into the unknown. The man who was rapidly becoming the most famous, beloved father figure on American movie screens was standing in an empty schoolyard, completely and utterly powerless. He had absolutely no idea where his own children were. It would take him 2 frantic, agonizing weeks of phone calls and desperate searching just to track them down to a house in Sacramento. But finding them was only the beginning, because the house they were currently living in was about to become a literal house of horrors. And the man known as America's Dad was about to discover that his fame, his money, and his movie contracts could not penetrate the walls of the hell his daughter was about to endure. If you drove past Susan's new house in Sacramento in the late 1980s, it looked like the ultimate idyllic California suburban dream. It was a crisp white house with classic architectural columns. It had a large backyard with a swimming pool. Inside, a young girl's bedroom was plastered floor to ceiling with pictures of horses. It looked exactly like the kind of house a successful Hollywood actor would provide for his children. But a white picket fence is often just a very polite, structural way to hide a complete disaster. The reality inside those walls was a terrifying, unchaperoned freefall. As the months dragged into years, the mental health of Tom's ex-wife, Susan, began to severely and aggressively deteriorate. To understand her collapse, you have to look at the brutal context of her life. She had met Tom when they were just broke theater students at Sacramento State University. They had struggled together. But now, she was divorced, isolated, and watching her ex-husband rapidly transform into a global megastar, while her own mind began to violently betray her. She was battling severe, undiagnosed mental health issues. She was gripped by extreme paranoia and deep delusions. And her 2 children, Colin and Ye, were completely trapped inside the blast radius of her illness. Let's look at this through the eyes of his daughter, Ye. Hanks. She was living in a state of constant, suffocating hypervigilance. That beautiful backyard with the swimming pool? As Susan's depression and paranoia deepened, the yard was completely abandoned. It became so completely covered in accumulated dog waste that the children could not even safely walk across the grass. The pristine White House constantly, heavily reeked of stale cigarette smoke. Imagine being a young girl, coming home from middle school, dropping your backpack on the floor, and walking into the kitchen because you are starving. You open the heavy door of the refrigerator, but there is no fresh food. The shelves are either completely bare or entirely packed with rotting, expired food that no one has bothered to throw away. While her mother retreated deeper and deeper into her own mind, spending endless hours lying in a massive four-poster bed, poring obsessively over the Bible in a manic search for answers, was left to navigate the wreckage entirely alone. She was a kid from what she bluntly called a first, non-famous marriage. Now, we have to pause and look at the brutal, incredibly dark irony of this exact timeline. Right at the very moment was dodging animal waste and staring into an empty refrigerator in Sacramento, her father was shooting to the absolute top of the Hollywood A-list. Tom Hanks was starring in massive, era-defining blockbusters like Splash and Big. He was on the cover of every major magazine. He was attending glamorous premieres, smiling on red carpets alongside his new wife, Rita Wilson. The entire global public was falling head over heels in love with him. They saw him as the ultimate safe harbor, the funny, reliable, profoundly decent man everyone wished they had as a best friend or father. He was universally beloved. He was wealthy. He was powerful. But when the camera stopped rolling, the America's dad was entirely, legally powerless to fix the reality of his own daughter's daily life. You can negotiate multi-million-dollar movie contracts. You can charm late-night talk show hosts with a brilliant anecdote. But the legal boundaries of a 1980s family court custody agreement are walls of iron. He was living in Los Angeles. She was living in Sacramento. He could only see his kids on designated weekends and during the summer holidays. Think about the psychological whiplash those children endured. On a Friday afternoon, they would be flown down to Los Angeles. They would enter Tom's world, a world of Hollywood wealth, stability, clean houses, and a famous father. And then, on Sunday night, they would be packed up and sent back to Sacramento, walking right back into a house smelling of stale smoke, where a paranoid mother was waiting in a four-poster bed. Why didn't Tom just kick down the door and take them? Because the legal system does not work like a movie script. Unless there is documented, undeniable proof of immediate physical danger, courts do not easily strip primary custody from a mother. So he had to wait. He had to agonize from a distance. But the emotional violence in that Sacramento house eventually, inevitably escalated. One night, the tension finally boiled over into actual physical violence. The storm broke. The illusion that they could simply manage the situation was completely shattered. The situation became completely legally and physically untenable. In the immediate aftermath of that violent night, right in the middle of the 7th grade, packed her bags. She fled Sacramento and moved full-time to Los Angeles to live with her father and her stepmother. The custody arrangement finally flipped. She had officially escaped the house. But you do not just walk away from a childhood like that without carrying the ghost with you. The erratic, terrifying nature of her mother's illness continued to cast a long shadow. When Ye was 14, her mother suddenly packed him into a massive Winnebago and drove across America along Interstate 10, a bizarre, nautical-feeling road trip driven by Susan's restless demons. And eventually, during EA's senior year of high school, the phone would ring. It was Susan, calling to say she was dying of lung cancer. Decades later, when Ye sifted through the remnants of her life, she realized she possessed exactly one photograph of her parents standing together in the same place. Just one picture, a graduation photo, and in it, her mother's best wig sits slightly askew on her head, a permanent, visual testament to a family that was never truly whole. When you hear a story like this, It completely recontextualizes the man you see on the movie screen. When Tom Hanks read his daughter's memoir in 2025 and publicly stated that he was not surprised by her trauma, it wasn't a cold Hollywood dismissal. It was a heavy, exhausted confession of a father who knew exactly what was happening behind those doors, but had been legally paralyzed to stop it. He had survived his own neglected childhood smelling of burnt tomato soup, only to watch his daughter survive a childhood smelling of stale smoke and expired food. He had tried to outrun the dysfunction of his own parents, only to watch the cycle of generational trauma repeat itself under his own watch. But by the early 1990s, the dust had seemingly settled. His children were safe with him in Los Angeles. Susan was out of the primary picture. He was winning back-to-back Academy Awards for Philadelphia and Forrest Gump. He was untouchable. He had outrun the poverty of Oakland. He had stabilized his fractured family. And he had reached the absolute, undeniable peak of human success. He had total control over his universe. Or so he thought. Because the universe has a very cruel, highly specific way of humbling men who think they have finally outsmarted fate. You can rescue your children from a broken house. You can win every award on the planet, but you cannot negotiate with your own internal biology. The Hollywood hero was about to discover that while he was busy conquering the box office and playing the savior on screen, his own body was quietly preparing to stage a massive, irreversible rebellion. When you spend your entire life building a fortress, you naturally assume that the greatest threats will always come from the outside. You lock the doors against poverty. You build legal walls to protect your children. You win Oscars to shield your ego from the critics. Tom Hanks had successfully barricaded himself against the entire world. But what do you do when the enemy is already inside the house? What do you do when the very vehicle that carried you out of the Oakland dirt quietly decides to turn against you? Throughout the 1990s and early 2000s, Tom did not treat his body like a biological organism. He treated it like a rental car. He pushed it to extreme, punishing limits, simply to satisfy the demands of his career. Think about the year 2000. He signs on to star in Castaway. To authentically play a man stranded on a deserted island, he intentionally subjected himself to starvation. The man who had already grown up hungry now forces his body back into a state of severe, brutal deprivation. He sheds a staggering 55 pounds. Picture him on that beach set. His face is hollow. His ribs are physically poking through his pale skin. He is constantly freezing, exhausted, and running on absolute fumes. He essentially turned himself right back into that 96-pound, invisible ghost of a teenager from high school. And the terrifying part? The world didn't stage an intervention. They gave him a Golden Globe and nominated him for another Academy Award. Hollywood literally rewarded him for destroying himself. But you cannot play reckless games with your internal organs and expect them to simply forgive you when the cameras stop rolling. The human body keeps a meticulous, unforgiving receipt. The first major betrayal did not happen on a movie set. It happened in the quiet, sterile, humming room of a doctor's office. For years, Tom had been running hot. The grueling film schedules, the extreme weight fluctuations, the stress. When he was 36 years old, his doctor looked at his blood work and warned him that his glucose numbers were creeping up. The check engine light was officially flashing. But he was Tom Hanks. He was invincible. He kept working. Fast forward to 2013. He is sitting on a talk show and he drops a casual, devastating medical confession to the public. He reveals that his doctor had finally sat him down, looked at the charts, and delivered the ultimate verdict. Well, you've graduated. You got type 2 diabetes, young man. It was delivered with a smile, but the reality of that diagnosis is a lifelong, grueling prison sentence. Think about the profound irony here. Remember the neglected little boy in the cramped apartment who used to open a refrigerator in the middle of the night and drink all the milk because there were absolutely no rules? Remember the kid who scraped burnt, sugary tomato soup off a cast iron stove? That kid is gone. Now, he is a wealthy man in his late 50s, and his own pancreas has completely revolted. He is forced into a life of rigid, absolute surveillance. The sharp, stinging scent of an alcohol wipe. The tiny, sharp prick of a lancet needle hitting the fingertip. The small bead of dark red blood squeezed onto a testing strip. Every single meal, every single physical sensation must now be meticulously calculated. The ultimate freedom he fought his entire life to achieve was suddenly replaced by a biological straitjacket. But diabetes was just the opening act. It was merely the slow, chronic erosion of the machine. The universe was still preparing to deliver an acute, terrifying reminder of his absolute mortality. Fast forward to March 2020. The entire globe is standing on the precipice of a terrifying, invisible plague. Tom Hanks and his wife, Rita Wilson, are in Queensland, Australia, for a film shoot. They start feeling strange. A heavy, creeping fatigue. Chills. They are rushed to the Gold Coast University Hospital. They are sealed inside a pressurized isolation room. The heavy, airtight doors close with a solid mechanical thud. The room hums loudly with the sound of negative air pressure ventilation systems, designed to keep the toxic air from escaping into the hallways. A nurse, covered head to toe in heavy protective medical gear, leans her head into the room. She looks at the most famous comforting man in America, and she delivers the news. You have COVID-19. He was patient zero for the celebrity world. The moment Tom Hanks caught the virus, the global panic became real. But inside that pressurized room, he wasn't a global icon. He was just a 63-year-old diabetic man, entirely at the mercy of a microscopic pathogen. The virus stripped away every ounce of his legendary stamina. He later recalled the sheer, terrifying physical subjugation of those days. His bones ached with a deep, searing, drilling pain. He was entirely, completely wiped out. The man who had famously run back and forth across the United States as Forrest Gump, the man who had survived a plane crash in Apollo 13, decided to try and do a simple, basic set of stretching exercises on a hospital floor just to keep his blood moving. He didn't make it to minute 13. After just 12 minutes of light stretching, his muscles completely gave out. He collapsed onto the hospital bed, gasping for air, absolutely exhausted to his core. He could not even stretch his own limbs without his body screaming in protest. Have you ever hit that terrifying wall? Have you ever looked in the mirror or tried to do a physical task that used to be incredibly easy and suddenly realize that your body simply refuses to obey your commands? It is the exact moment you realize you are no longer the driver. You are just a passenger in a vehicle that is slowly breaking down. If you know the deep, quiet panic of that realization, drop a comment below. Because confronting the betrayal of your own flesh is the one battle that money absolutely cannot fix. Tom survived the virus. He and Rita eventually flew back to the United States. He returned to the movie sets. He went back to doing interviews and smiling for cameras. He played the part of the resilient survivor perfectly. But viruses and chronic diseases do not just pass through a body without leaving deep, invisible scars behind. They accelerate the clock. They loosen the hinges. As the calendar rolled toward the end of 2024, Tom was approaching his late 60s. The public still wanted him to be the energetic, infallible America's dad. But the armor was rusting. The machine was rattling. And on a freezing, highly publicized stage in New York City, the world was about to catch a terrifying, uncontrollable glimpse of the exact toll those decades of stress and illness had taken on his nervous system. The Hollywood hero was about to lose his grip. Literally. There is a specific, terrifying vulnerability that comes with live television. When you are shooting a movie, you can hide your physical limitations. If your hand shakes, The director simply yells cut, you take a breath, and you shoot it again. The audience only sees the flawless, edited final product. But live television does not offer a safety net. It is a ruthless, unblinking mirror. Fast forward to December 2024. Tom Hanks is standing on the iconic stage of Saturday Night Live in New York City. Studio 8H is notoriously freezing. The heavy air conditioning blasts down from the lighting grid to keep the massive studio equipment from overheating. He is making a highly anticipated cameo appearance, standing next to comedy legend Martin Short. The script calls for a simple, completely ordinary piece of physical acting. Tom is supposed to hold a cocktail glass and hand it over to Martin. He raises his hand. And in that fraction of a second, the entire illusion of the untouchable American hero fractures on live television. His hand is trembling. It is not just a slight shiver from the cold studio air. It is a pronounced, uncontrollable, high-frequency vibration running straight through his fingers and up his wrist. The high-definition cameras capture every single micro-movement. You can literally see the liquid inside the cocktail glass sloshing and shaking against the rim. He tries to steady himself, attempting to mask the spasm, but the nervous system does not negotiate with willpower. The moment is broadcast into millions of living rooms across the country. Within minutes, the internet erupts. Fans begin posting the clipped video, zooming in on his trembling fingers. The comment sections are flooded with genuine, terrified concern. People are comparing the tremor to the early, visible signs of an aging nervous system, whispering fears about Parkinson's disease or the severe, compounding effects of his long-term diabetes. For the last 40 years, the public had relied on Tom Hanks to be the absolute rock of stability. He was the captain holding the ship together. But watching that glass shake in his hand was a stark, undeniable broadcast of his own mortality. The machine was finally breaking down in plain sight. Now, I want you to mentally split the screen. While millions of strangers are analyzing that video clip on their phones, cut to a quiet room in Los Angeles. Sitting at a desk is a 42-year-old woman. She is staring at her laptop screen. This is Ye. Hanks. At the exact same time her father's physical decline is becoming a global spectacle, she is actively typing the manuscript for her memoir, The 10, a memoir of family and the open road. She is plunging her hands deep into the psychological wreckage of the 1980s. She is typing out the memories of the dog waste in the Sacramento backyard. She is remembering the sharp, stinging smell of the stale cigarette smoke. She is writing about the terrifying, unpredictable violence of her mother's unchecked mental illness. Look at the brutal, devastating poetry of this exact moment. On one side of the country, the father's hand is physically trembling, entirely unable to control a simple glass. On the other side of the country, the daughter's hands are typing out the story of how her father was entirely unable to control the chaos of her childhood. They are both victims of things they cannot conquer. When Ye looks at the footage of her father shaking on that stage, she is not looking at the invincible America's dad that the rest of the world sees. She is looking at a frail, aging man who is running out of time. See, when we're children, we view our parents as omnipotent gods. If they don't save us from the monsters, we assume it is because they didn't care enough to try. It takes decades of our own painful adult experiences to realize the terrifying truth. Our parents were never gods. They were just flawed, deeply damaged people, stumbling through the dark, fighting their own invisible wars, and dropping the ball because their hands were simply too full. Tom Hanks could not kick down the door in Sacramento because the law forbade it. He could not cure his ex-wife's bipolar paranoia because medical science has limits. And now, he cannot stop his own hand from vibrating because biology always wins the final round. Have you ever reached that profoundly sobering moment in your life? Have you ever looked at your aging mother or father, the people you might have spent your entire life being quietly angry at, and suddenly realize how incredibly fragile they actually are? If you've ever felt the anger melt into a heavy, heartbreaking kind of empathy, drop a comment below. Because recognizing the sheer helplessness of the people who raise you is one of the most painful rites of passage in human existence. As the calendar officially flipped into the year 2026, the noise surrounding the Hanks family began to shift. The publication date for EA's memoir was rapidly approaching. The secrets of the Sacramento house were about to be laid bare for the entire world to consume, judge, and dissect. For a man whose entire public empire was built on the foundation of the perfect, wholesome family image, a tell-all memoir from a daughter from his first non-famous marriage had the potential to be a catastrophic, brand-destroying public relations nightmare. The media expected a fight. They expected statements of denial. They expected Tom Hanks to suit up, walk out onto the red carpets, and defend his legacy against the ghosts of his past. But Hollywood doesn't always get the explosive third act it demands. The winter of 2026 arrived, bringing with the biggest, most glamorous nights in the entertainment industry. The cameras were flashing. The limousines were lining up. But the man who had spent 40 years owning the spotlight was suddenly noticeably absent. The final reckoning had arrived, but it was not going to take place in front of a microphone. It was going to take place in the quiet, echoing rooms of an empty house. When the final undeniable reckoning arrives in a family, it almost never happens with a dramatic, shouting confrontation. It happens in the quiet. It happens in the spaces where a person simply chooses to stop performing. February 1st, 2026. The Grammy Awards in Los Angeles. The red carpet is a chaotic, blinding explosion of camera flashes, screaming reporters, and the absolute highest tier of global celebrity royalty. Stepping out of a black limousine is Rita Wilson. She looks immaculate, wearing a stunning evening gown. And holding her hand, stepping into the glaring spotlight, is their 15-year-old granddaughter. They are the picture-perfect representation of a Hollywood dynasty. They are smiling, celebrating a family milestone in front of the entire world. But the man who built that dynasty, the patriarch who had anchored the family's public image for 40 years, is entirely missing from the frame. Tom Hanks is not walking down the red carpet. He is not standing next to his wife. He is not shielding his granddaughter from the paparazzi. He chose, completely deliberately, to stay home. In fact, the only trace the public gets of the legendary actor on that glamorous night is a blurry, distorted reflection caught over his wife's shoulder in a backstage photograph. A ghost in the background. Why does a man who has spent his entire adult life mastering the cameras suddenly decide to hide from them? Because you cannot stand on a red carpet and pretend to be the perfect America's dad when your own daughter has just published a book exposing the terrifying, broken reality of her childhood. The illusion had finally been pierced. The truth about the house in Sacramento, the expired food, the mental illness, and the dog waste was now sitting on bookstore shelves across the country. The media industry waited with bated breath for the pushback. They expected Tom's high-priced publicist to release a carefully worded statement minimizing EA's trauma, protecting his brand, and defending his legacy. But Tom Hanks did not deploy the lawyers. He did not issue a denial. He simply nodded and publicly admitted that he was not surprised by the horror she survived. Now look at the profound, devastating honesty of that response. He wasn't surprised because he already knew exactly how the story of a broken childhood ends. Sitting alone in his house on the night of the Grammys, approaching his 70th birthday, Tom Hanks wasn't just a movie star. He was a man deeply marked by the physical and emotional scars of simply trying to survive. His blood sugar was heavily monitored by machines. The virus he caught in an Australian isolation ward had permanently sapped his energy. His nervous system was fraying, causing his hands to involuntarily tremble when he held a glass. His body was failing, and his past had finally caught up with him. When he read his daughter's memoir, he didn't just read about her pain. He saw his own reflection staring right back at him. He saw the invisible 96-pound kid sitting on a rumbling Greyhound bus for 5 hours. He smelled the thick, sour stench of burnt tomato soup clinging to the walls of a dirty Oakland apartment. He remembered the cold, hollow feeling of opening a refrigerator in the middle of the night and realizing that absolutely no one was coming to take care of him. He had spent his entire life running away from that empty refrigerator. He rushed into his first marriage because he was desperate to build a warm, loving home. He worked grueling hours to pull his family out of the financial dirt. He fought to get custody when the marriage collapsed. He tried with absolutely everything he had to break the cycle. But you cannot buy a cure for a partner's severe mental illness. You cannot legally kick down a door and override a family court judge in the 1980s. And you cannot completely shield your children from the collateral damage of a broken home. Tom Hanks gave the world the ultimate father figure. He gave us Forrest Gump and Captain Miller and Mr. Rogers. He poured every ounce of his empathy, his patience, and his warmth into the camera lens. Why? Because on a movie set, there is a script. On a movie set, the hero always knows exactly what to say to make the pain go away. On a movie set, you have absolute control over the ending. But in the real world, behind closed doors, there is no script. There are just flawed, traumatized human beings, completely unequipped for the disasters they are handed, trying to keep their heads above water. He couldn't be the perfect father in reality, because no one had ever taught him what a perfect father looked like. His decision to stay home on the night of the 2026 Grammys, and his decision to publicly validate his daughter's painful memoir without a fight, is not an act of surrender. It is an act of profound, incredibly brave acceptance. He is accepting the fact that he is not a god. He is accepting the trembling in his hands. He is accepting the fact that despite his billion-dollar box office records, he could not protect his daughter from the dark. And most importantly, he is finally forgiving himself for being human. He stops fighting the narrative. He lets the world see the cracks in the foundation. Because true legacy is not about maintaining a flawless, plastic illusion until the day you die. True legacy is looking at the wreckage of your own life, acknowledging people who got hurt along the way, and saying, I did the absolute best I could with the broken tools I was given, and I am sorry it wasn't enough. Here is a hard, honest question for those of you who have spent decades trying to raise a family. Have you ever looked back at the early years of your parenting and felt a heavy, sinking guilt over the things you couldn't fix? Have you ever had to accept the heartbreaking reality that your own unhealed scars, or circumstances entirely out of your control, ended up causing pain to the people you love the most? If you have ever carried the heavy weight of a parent's regret, tell us how you finally learned to forgive yourself in the comments below. We read every single one, and your honesty might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. If this unvarnished look at the real man behind the America's Dad myth resonated with you, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Because every perfect smile hides a deeply human struggle, and we are here to walk through the truth together. Until next time, be gentle with yourselves and with each other,